Hello and welcome back to the C1 Cybersecurity Posture Assessment. This video will cover questions 69 through 78. Does the district have anti-malware protection for all enterprise assets? Score 0 if your organization does not have anti-malware protection. Score 1 if your organization has anti-malware protection for some of your assets. Score 2 if your organization has anti-malware protection for the majority of your asset. 3 if your organization has anti-malware protection for almost all assets. Or 4 if your organization has anti-malware protection for all assets. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. Is the anti-malware software updated on a regular basis? Score 0 if your organization does not update anti-malware. Score 1 if your organization updates anti-malware infrequently and/or inconsistently. Score 2 if your organization has a formal process and updates anti-malware less than weekly. 3 if your organization has a formal process and updates anti-malware at least weekly. And 4 if your organization has a formal automated process and is continually checking to ensure anti-malware software is updated. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. Is the district anti-malware centrally managed? Score 0 if your organization does not centrally manage anti-malware. Score 1 if your organization centrally manages anti-malware for some systems. Score 2 if your organization centrally manages anti-malware for most systems. 3 if your organization centrally manages anti-malware for almost all devices. And 4 if your organization centrally manages anti-malware for all devices. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. Does the district have an anti-malware solution that scans removable media, or does the district restrict the use of removable media? Score 0 if your organization does not address malware on removable media. Score 1 if your organization partially addresses malware on removable media. Score 2 if your organization addresses malware on removable media for the most part. 3 if your organization addresses malware on removable media almost completely. Or 4 if your organization has an optimal implementation for addressing malware on removable media. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. Does the district use methods to detect malicious code in email, such as attachment scanning and/or sandboxing? Score 0 if your organization does not address malicious code in email. Score 1 if your organization partially addresses malicious code in email. Score 2 if your organization addresses malicious code in email for the most part. 3 if your organization addresses malicious code in email almost completely. Or 4 if your organization has an optimal implementation for addressing malicious code in email. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. Are devices configured not to auto-run content from removable media? Score 0 if your organization does not address auto-run for content on removable media. Score 1 if your organization has configured some devices not to auto-run content on removable media. Score 2 if your organization has configured most devices not to auto-run content on removable media. 3 if your organization has configured almost all devices not to auto-run content on removable media. Or 4 if your organization has configured all devices not to auto-run content on removable media. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. Does the district have URL filtering in place to help block access to potentially malicious sites? Score 0 if your organization does not have URL filtering in place. Score 1 if your organization has URL filtering in place, but it is inconsistently updated for new sites. Score 2 if your organization has URL filtering in place and it is updated for new sites at least quarterly. 3 if your organization has URL filtering in place and it is updated for new sites at least monthly. Or 4 if your organization has URL filtering in place and it is continually updated using a service. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. Does the district use domain name service, filtering service, to help block access to known malicious sites? Score 0 if your organization does not use DNS filtering service, or score 4 if your organization does use DNS filtering service. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. Is traffic between network segments filtered where appropriate? Score 0 if your organization does not filter traffic between network segments. Score 1 if your organization partially filters traffic between network segments. Or 4 if your organization filters all traffic between all network segments. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. Does the district have a network intrusion detection system set to look for unusual attack mechanisms and to detect compromise at each of the district's network boundaries? Score 0 if your organization does not have an intrusion detection system. Score 1 if your organization has minimal IDS implementation, such as Internet Boundary Only. Score 2 if your organization has adequate IDS implementation for at least 50% of network boundaries. Score 3 if your organization has majority of network boundaries protected using an IDS. Or 4 if your organization has an optimal IDS implementation with all network boundaries protected. Pause the video now in order to consider and record your answer before continuing. You are now finished with questions 69 through 78. The next video will be Cyber Posture Assessment Slides 09. You can start that now or take a break and continue with the posture assessment later.